thank you for coming back. It doesn't look like we lost anybody over the break, so that's reassuring. We are ready now to jump into our next section of the program. So just briefly to introduce what we're going to do, this is a little different, as you can see from our comfy armchairs up here. We are going to have somewhat of a more informal panel discussion. So you'll recognize a couple of these faces. You'll also recognize a couple of new faces whom we'll introduce joining us, but all representing the same organizations that you have just heard the 5 great keynote speeches from. Now, as we get into this, we'll spend an hour in this panel discussion, and I want to pre-warn you that the plan is to have a few minutes for question and answer following the panel. So please make special note of any questions that you do have, and we'll give you the opportunity to ask those of the panelists. So without further ado, I just want to introduce one of the newer faces up here, not a new face to many of you, but new on the stage, Carl Vredenberg, who's joining us, who is a long-time pillar in the design community, someone who spent years and years at IBM, heading their UX research and UX design division, creating many of the frameworks you've probably heard of and used in your career, and more recently, having retired from that position and starting his own nonprofit, and maybe you'll speak a little bit about this in your journey there. But a well-seasoned and fantastic and compassionate person to lead us through this panel discussion. So I'll give it over to you, Carl. Please welcome Carl and the rest of these panelists to the stage.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I did retire from IBM just a few months ago. And when I announced that I was retiring, Don actually said, you know, you might think that you're going to be less busy, but in actual fact, you'll be even busier. But the difference will be that you'll be doing the work that you wish to do rather than what a company wants me to do. And I wanted to actually lean into that because I've been so impressed with hanging around with all of you and all the people on the stage here in terms of the focus they all have in making the world a better place. I've spent most of my career working in the for-profit space, and in my part-time focused on things that were, you know, non-profit focused. But I just really admire people that are committing themselves to a career in the design for a better world space. And I want to start with that as well. So there's 2 people that have joined that you haven't seen before, Sarah, you, and Bogdan. So I wanted to start with just asking them to give a brief perspective on what motivated them, what inspired them to get into this space as opposed to, for example, a for-profit space as well. So starting off with Sarah.
Hi everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here, and thanks Carl for this question and the opportunity to share my journey with everyone here. And you know, my journey was similar to Shiva, where I was studying at an engineering school back in India at IIT, and the predominant way of doing things was in a very linear fashion, right? Solving problems with a very deductive kind of methodology. And I thought that there has to be a way of doing things different. There has to be a way of designing things beyond the screen. And that's when I started kind of taking some courses in economics and mathematics and social sciences, just kind of widen my perspective of how to design for society. And I did a couple of projects as a student, but then I graduated and started working for the tech world. It was the era of internet boom and a lot of startups, and it was great. It was a very rewarding experience. I was designing interfaces for millions of users and being paid well to do so, but I knew that somewhere down the line I wasn't deeply satisfied. I wasn't feeling motivated to continue this journey further, and that's when I decided to pivot. So I left my cushy job, I started looking for designing for good opportunities, and I came across this project for a social consulting in India, a social impact consulting space, and we were designing a project for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where we were solving for under 5 child mortality and morbidity in very rural parts of India. And that was truly transformative because I saw the power of ethnography, I saw the power of bringing different perspectives and stakeholders together, you know, and the impact that design could have, and that kind of pushed me to pursue this field further. Then I went on to do my master's, especially in service design, with a focus on designing for public policy and international development. And since then, I have been with Aga Khan Foundation for the past 5 years now. We are really pioneering in the field of community-led design, and it has has been the most rewarding experience ever. So and I hope to continue this work. So that's my journey.
We're glad you did. Over to Bogdan.
Thanks, first and foremost. Yeah, for me the story is with a bit of a twist, because in my previous life I was a researcher. I was an academic. I was at the end of my PhD studies a bit up north here at Berkeley, and then I was doing research in war zones, by the way, in conflict zones. I was a humanitarian lawyer. And then a tragedy happened back home in Romania, where I wasn't living for 11 years. I moved out of Romania 11 years before. And then a club burned down in the center of Bucharest, in the center of the capital. Over 60 people died that night in the fire. And it was not only a tragedy, but a huge turning point for Romanian civil society and for Romania as a whole. People took to the streets, the government fell, and it felt like a point to start over. And I myself asked myself, what can I do to help out back home? And I had no contact with design, I had no contact with technology, but I realized that nobody was using technology in Romania to try to change society for the best. And I saw other people around the world doing it, from Pakistan among others. And I thought maybe we apply this back in Romania. And I went back to Romania. I moved back into the country after 11 years abroad. And I met Olivia, which you heard a bit earlier, who was a UX designer. And I heard about UX design for the first time from Olivia. Rapidly, it became one of the largest and most consequential civic tech organizations in the world. And 8 years after that point, 7, 8 years after that point, the war came to Romania, or to the border of Romania in Ukraine, and somehow my two lives came together. And not only that my two lives came together, but it became apparent that whatever we build in Romania and this whole infrastructure for good that we were building was necessary anywhere else in the world. And this is how we started Keynote.
Love those stories. So, question, I wanted to start with you. Your presentation was fascinating. I also got the sense that it was pretty easy, everything you did, and sort of leaning into what Don was saying about what kind of pain did you actually go through? What kind of challenges did you really face? I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more. I mean, the Seagull Mobile and the art therapy workshops, even the baby bus, it seemed like they just fell into your lap and somebody went and paid for it. So tell us a little more about the actual pain and what challenges you had.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The first challenge for me as a psychologist is to keep the people alive. And this situation is often present in humanitarian settings or in migration or, asylum-seeking families or displaced people migrating or those who are refugees. So there are different conditions, but all depend on the American migration policy. So that is the changing environment for us, other than the double wall that Trump created. So that created many challenges. But also for us as a tiny organization, each of the projects had particular challenges not for designing, that's easy. But the implementation part, it's the most difficult one. Because you have not only to work with people or families, but with decision makers, those who run the shelters. So sometimes things happen, bad things happen on several shelters, and let's say it affected our intervention, but the thing is that it affected how the people they help affected most to them. But for us, I said there were many challenges. One of them obviously is the grants, the money, but the most important thing is always people. And as I mentioned before, the psychosocial affect. Well, the psychosocial problems that they face, they have many needs and just a few services available for them. And well, you have to know that all of the services are free for them. Not only an organization, but probably all the other organizations in Tijuana. So it's difficult to provide free services when when you have like many people trying to create or give this public opinion or in social media that they're against migration, you know. So for us, to create these projects was like an act of rebellion against the public opinion, because there are many people, not only here in the States, but in Tijuana, that are against migrants. So let's say many people do not support us, and that's another challenge, because we have to create meaningful programs, meaningful activities in order for the people to get better. And yeah, I'm saying that as a psychologist, because the most important thing is to keep them alive. And we are happy that we did.
So I'm also imagining, you know, some award winners in here, they're also thinking about their project, and the number one challenge they're going to have is actually funding. Maybe just give us a really quick idea of, you talked about UNICEF supporting the baby bus, for example. Just briefly, how did you make that happen?
Well, they invited us. They saw our Psychomobile, and they said, oh, you work, that's a very innovative way. It seems like you can manage a lot of people, because you go like 20 people to one shelter. So it seems like you are the only organization that could hold this. And yeah, so they offered us, can you do it? Yeah, we do it, we can do it. And we did. But they have their own policies, so it's very difficult to comply and fulfill all the requirements from UNICEF. And yeah, there was the intervention grant, and then to keep them, again, it was more difficult. So yeah, working with those international organizations is a challenge of their own. But let's say compared to the other organization that funds El Psicomóvil, which is Choose Love, I love Choose Love. It's completely love. So they don't comply, they don't regret anything. They are there to support. So it's very easy. That's why it looks easy, but it's not.
Thanks for that. So, Annette, when you look at metrics in the for-profit world, pretty clear. Revenue, profit, customer sat. In the non-profit world, in this Design for Good world, it's a whole lot less clear. You talked about the importance of research, both evidential research from published research as well as doing research. You talked about doing benchmarks before and after. Talk to us a little about how that can be used for essentially measuring impact, and then how useful that is in getting funding as well.
Well, thank you. That's a big question. Maybe I'll start on the measurement side of it, because what we're really talking about is the ability to measure outcomes meaningfully, but then also the ability to understand or attribute those outcomes to the work that we're doing. So one of the things that I love about Don's book is focusing on measurement. A lot of people think measurement is easy. That's the easy part of research. Oh, and then we'll just measure it. It's not easy. It can be very difficult to come up with metrics that are both meaningful and that are also useful, that help us to understand something that will then guide us to better work. Don talks a little bit about indices, which we think allow us to bring a lot of complex ideas together, but actually give us a number that we can't do very much with. In some sectors, measurement's a little bit easier. So in global health, it can be easier. If you're looking to reduce maternal mortality or infant mortality, that's a pretty clear number, and you can measure it. In education, a lot of times there are standard testing instruments that you can use. But a lot of what we want to do for social good is not in those easily measured sectors, like increasing democratic values, or the role of civil society organizations, or peace building and mutual understanding. So that's a challenge my organization is dealing with all the time. And some of the things that we're looking to do are to identify what are things that we can observe that might be proxies for those changes, where we can take that information without having to rely on too many surveys. Because every time we go and survey a community, again, we are taxing their time. But sometimes if we want to truly understand, we need to do that. On the evidence side, I think what's important again is really understanding the effect of your activity, your intervention. And why do I keep focusing on what the nerds, I'm sure Bogdan will understand when I use the word counterfactual. Why is it so important that we use precious resources to look at what's happening outside of our intervention? Well, let's take the humanitarian context that we've been talking about. In that context, over the before and after period of time, it's very likely that everything is getting worse. So if you are just measuring your outcomes before and after, it's likely that things are getting worse. It doesn't really tell you whether you've had an effect. What's likely, what we hope, is that things are getting less worse where you've been working than they are in other places. And you can reveal that impact, you can measure that outcome if you're able to compare to some kind of outside comparison or counterfactual.
So Bogdan, you heard Lydia talk about your organization and its successes. Similar to my questioning of Christian in terms of let's open the curtains a little, or look behind the scenes. Talk to us a little bit about what kind of a failure you might have experienced, what particular kind of challenges you really had, and what you learned from them, and then how you overcame them.
Yeah, no, these are the difficult discussions that we need to have. And I think the main objective is not to avoid these failures, but to turn them around in the process of the project. So if by the end of the project, if by the end of the objective that you have in mind, you're able to turn most of them around, to have enough lateral thinking, to have enough, B case, C cases in your mind, and enough options to go around so you can revert some of those things, I think that you're in a good spot. But I would say the most difficult stuff, especially in the humanitarian setting that we're working, is the fact that you have very territorial actors. The most territorial of all actors, the government, the state. Usually when we go in, most of the failures are not seen because they're small challenges, they're more small failures, but at the end we are able to deploy those solutions on the ground, so it means that we're able to get over them. But on a day-to-day basis, we encounter lack of capacity of government, put together with lack of capacity but authority at the same time. And they don't allow others in. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. For example, I think it was 2 years ago when there was a huge earthquake in Turkey. And we wanted to intervene, and we had the technology to intervene and to help people on the ground. We knew that we could save lives. Not only us, but other organizations as well. And the government was open at first, and then they said, no, we're not going to receive this help. And yeah, that's a failure because we were not able to find a way around it. And not only us, the Red Cross was not allowed in. Because part of what we do with technology is that we bring data and we bring traceability. And many times government is afraid of traceability and data. Many times they don't understand, they're so digitally literate that they don't see that this is what we're doing. And it works like a positive Trojan horse, like I say. We put in the traceability, we put in the cooperation in those solutions that we build and we design, but they don't pay attention enough to see it before it happens. So those are the success stories. Many times they see it coming, and we're not able to do it. And the other very territorial organizations are the huge international NGOs and the UN agencies. And that is a very hard nut to crack. How do you make them cooperate? Because part of our vision is to have a shared infrastructure, to build everybody on the same solution, which lowers the cost, which lowers the time of the intervention, but it also means that it's not the solutions of the Red Cross, it's not the solution of the UNHCR, it's all of their solution. It's them, all of them together. So this is, and many times we fail at convincing them, but we're trying to go in different ways to convince them to crack this nut, to go top down, to go bottom up, to go and work with their organization on the ground and give them some small tools, start from somewhere small and grow from there, show examples, like we're doing now in Lebanon. We were in a chaotic environment like Lebanon, we were very aware that we can't pull a success story like in Ukraine overnight. So we started from one topic, healthcare. So we're working with a few organizations that were opened enough, with the Ministry of Health that was opened enough to receive our help. And we're trying to offer an example about the power of technology used for good there and convince others.
Excellent. So Sarah, I wanted to ask, we talked in Don's book and all his other books have talked about various design methods and approaches. Can you talk a little bit about the approaches that have worked best for you, ones that are the most challenging? Often a lot of you have talked about the whole notion of co-creating rather than being that colonist that's coming in and I know best. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about your experience of using these methods.
Sure, and I think I'd probably just lean on to one of the projects that we did to speak to some of those challenges, because we all would agree that community-led design is the way to go forward. It is the right thing to do because we are designing not just for them but with them by the projects that truly reflect their needs. But there are a host of challenges that emerge when you're kind of actually implementing a project. And there was this one time when it was my first year at Aga Khan Foundation, and we were trying to introduce human-centered design as a way of problem solving, and we were trying to design for better early childhood access and outcomes in remote regions of Kyrgyzstan. And we got started on the project, the team was really new, it was the first time that they were experimenting with HCD, and it was a totally challenging process because when we started kind of getting them to do the research, this was not the kind of mindset that they had. This was not a traditional practice. They were used to just implementing the activities that were already proposed. So in order to kind of convince them to take on the research hat and do these ethnographies and interviews was quite a challenge. And then, similarly, when we started doing prototyping, they were very apprehensive about putting something out there in the community and raising the community's expectations because they'd fear that we have a reputational risk here. What if we are unable to deliver what we are eventually promising or experimenting with them? And then there are all kinds of organizational challenges because then we kind of came up with a particular design solution. We pitched to an internal steering committee, and the technical advisor advised us against that particular solution, and then we had to pivot. But then for the team, it was like a big moment of failure. We couldn't believe that all these months of work and doing the research and adopting this new mindset wasn't helpful at all, when eventually you're failing. So, to convince them that this is just a part of the process and, we have a lot to learn here and we have great stakeholder interviews and insights and partnerships that are already built that we could bank on. It was quite a journey. We went on, we designed something again, got great kind of approval within the steering committee, and we went ahead and pitched the solution to USAID. And interestingly, USAID thought that that was a great solution. It was ready to kind of go ahead and implement, but they were kind of curious as to why we took 1 year to kind of design that solution when their team sitting back in the Washington DC office would have designed it in a month. And I think that was a moment of revelation because that kind of got us thinking that probably we didn't manage expectations too well about what innovation means. Because probably internally, what we understood by innovation was co-creating with the community so that they eventually own the solutions that they're designing, that the team that designed the solution feels passionate about implementing those activities. But what USAID probably understood by innovation was something that was novel and that was out of the context. So there are all these kind of very interesting challenges that one doesn't anticipate when kind of taking on this co-creation process. But then still, I think the point that Burgan made about that failure would be just like a moment in the entire design process. And if you keep persisting and innovating and be agile, you're eventually going to lead up to a moment of success.
So Sheila, over to you. You told a story that I thought was so moving about the way that KP and your fellowship program sort of brought all these women to be able to do stuff that I couldn't imagine that you'd be able to accomplish, right? And you mentioned the challenges of, access to a cell phone account and all those things. But you also talked about the way that the men in the community, the husbands and fathers, really came around. What was your experience in dealing with them to begin with, and getting women accounts and all that kind of stuff? Talk a little bit about, that can't have been that easy. So tell us a little bit about the challenges you might have had there.
Yeah, so there's a team on the ground in the KP province that we have. I'm very, very fortunate to have. And what's interesting is that a lot of the team members are actually, they used to be fellows themselves. So they have gone through this process in our fellowship program, and now they're helping manage the women's internship program. So one of them, for instance, Bushra, she understood a lot of the challenges that these women face because she was also from KP, she had been through all of these things. And so, initially, they were women who applied, and once they were selected, they were concerned that they wouldn't actually be able to participate. Our team was on the phone with them, Bushra talking to their parents, their husbands, whoever needed to be convinced to say, hey, this is going to be excellent. And is it still working? Yeah. And that your daughter or wife or whoever will be able to work from home. Also the government, the internship is done by the government, which means that there's respectability or it's safe as compared to them going out of the home. So that helps. But there's a lot of manual intervention involved in this, right? The thing that was a huge game changer was giving them stipends and convincing the government to give them stipends. Because when there's actually money coming in, that changes everything. It brings, it makes it the men who are supporting the women more open to that, right? Because there's actually money going to be coming in. And I think we had to really think about, as I mentioned, those barriers. Every single one of those barriers that we uncovered one by one, how do we tackle this, and then go and pitch to the government and say, hey, let's offer this. Even, for example, the program has mentors, and it's a 6-month mentored program, and everything rests on the quality of those mentors and how dedicated they are, because they really have to, these women graduated from college, but they never had work experience, and there's a huge delta between, just graduating from college in theory and then actually being able to be a part of the workforce. And so these mentors really had to spend a lot of time with them, so we made sure the mentors got a stipend too, right? And just thinking about all of the different aspects of the system that need, and when we think about, I think, humanity-centered design, right? It's thinking about the whole system end to end, and as I talked about at the beginning, we didn't think about the system end to end. And then learning, okay, every little spoke there is, anything that's a barrier, we go there and we systematically take it down and think about, how to counter it with something that's often a little out of the box or creative, if you will. And I was just so incredibly proud when I was there for the demo day, and I saw the women when they were presenting one by one, just how far they came in those 6 months, thanks to the mentorship. And it really does take a village, So every time, not just the mentors were fantastic, but we had speakers from all around the world, We taught them how to present, we taught them how to show up for a job interview, all of those soft skills. Like, you really have to invest a lot of, just getting down to the brass tacks and like really making this happen. But then, boy, is it worth it, because it's not just them and their lives, but then it's their next generation, it's their community around them. They're also contributing to the community because we have them work on civic projects, and that effect just multiplies. It's actually really, really worth it. So, not easy, but if it were, I don't think any of us would be here.
So, Annette, I think all of these organizations are learning organizations in the sense that each story told, the ways in which they change things and the like, and yours certainly looks like a learning organization as well. Tell us where you're currently at and what kinds of things you're learning now that you're going to be doing differently in the future, because you've been around for a while doing this, and I mean, your organization, you have to, but I mean, it's really, I'm really thinking about what's the next step for your organization that you learned from.
Thank you. I think I've just been told that I'm old, but I'll wear that badge with honor. We certainly have not solved everything, and it was interesting that you used the words learning organization, because right now part of our current strategy is to become a better learning organization, recognizing that we're a long way from perfecting that. You would think, wow, you've got an organization working in 60 different countries across a variety of sectors. There must be learning going on all the time, but it's very easy to get siloed within individual projects and within individual countries. The same thing about innovation. I think one of the challenges, especially for organizations that are funded by submitting proposals that are accepted, and then we go and do what it is that you've asked us to do, is that we think that innovation happens at that proposal stage. And that's not the right place for innovation, because you don't have any evidence yet that these prototypes are going to work, and you don't have the opportunity to test those prototypes until you actually, unless you are the one chosen to get the funding. So a couple things that we're doing. Our new innovation architecture is really trying to, first of all, make everybody part of the innovation culture, to give everybody a role to play in innovation, and to try to push innovation into existing projects, rather than thinking about innovation that happens when we're writing new proposals. Because in existing projects, now you have an opportunity to test your prototypes, to find out if they work. And then you have that evidence to bring back to your proposals later that you've discovered an innovation that appears to be successful. So we're trying to, not that we're discouraging our proposal writers from trying to be innovative, but we're really trying to push innovation into our current projects to solve the challenges that they're facing on the ground, so that we can immediately test our innovations. In terms of learning organization, I think we're at the beginning of that pathway. We're certainly trying to think about how we can use technology, but I think we're learning that there are limits to technology. So again, one of the things we want to understand is how we can convene our own internal networks and share experiences and cross-pollinate better.
I have a question for each of you in turn. A couple of questions, actually. The first one, I talked earlier on when we started here about this whole notion of working in this space. That it clearly has huge benefits to each of you personally. That's why you're in this. And also probably serious challenges that you have personally working in this area. It generally tends not to pay as well, for example, as the for-profit space. I'd love each of you to just reflect on for a moment what you get personally out of the work you do every day, and also what kinds of, what ways would you like to have this whole effort that we're working on here be improved for your own experience? Are you starting with you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest kind of takeaways doing this work for about 10 years now would be, I think, the importance of patience. Because when I was working in the tech domain, you launch a product and in a month you're already getting a number of metrics. You see how the users are engaging with each and every screen, you see where are the drop-offs, it's easier to iterate, it's easier to have those learnings. But when working in the development sector, impact takes so much longer to become visible, and I think that is a process that you learn only when you are in it, right? When you are doing this work. And I remember when I joined the Aga Khan Foundation, the first kind of project that we did got implemented after 2 years, took 4 years to eventually show the impact. And I think that was, for me, such an eye-opening experience, because I had started to kind of appreciate all the work that goes into implementation and how difficult it is to make things reality, to get them out of these good presentations that they create on the screen, but then have those concepts working on the ground, to have stakeholders agree to event, because a lot of the times the solutions that come out of the human-centered design process are eventually aiming to create some kind of behavior change, right? And that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of effort. So I think for me is to really appreciate the work that goes in the field, because a lot of times we kind of sit in cushy offices, even in the development sector, in a lot of jobs, and we don't see the effort that goes on in making some of these solutions practical and possible. So I think that would be for me.
So I guess I'll give 2 answers. One, for me personally, what I really enjoy about this work is the possibility to combine the parts of me that really love to be thoughtful and to measure and to analyze and to do research with the parts of me that like to make things happen and to observe change. And so I feel like the tenets of human-centered design, and even more so, the tenets of humanity-centered design, where we're addressing complex systems, allow us to both learn and analyze and use data and evidence and be thoughtful, but also to make things happen. But I will also, in reflecting on where I am in my career today, I want to pick up on something that Bogdan said, which he very rightfully criticized some of the large international NGOs and the roles that they have historically taken on and persist in a variety of contexts. And one of the things that I really appreciate where I am now, having a strategy and an innovation and an evidence role, is to help one large international NGO, nonprofit organization, to transform itself and to both take on the challenges. What role do we play when we need to understand the need to increasingly localize and to have community-led and locally-led development? How can we still support that and play a role? And also, how can we make sure that for the work that we do, we're not just producing endline outcomes. We're not just measuring something at the end of our funding, at the end of our project, but how do we know that what we're doing is creating sustainable impact? That if we go back 5 years, there will be changes that resulted from the work that we did and that eventually allow us to work ourselves out of a job. And so that's one of the focuses we have now in my strategy work, and I think that really also allows me to bring together these ideas of design and innovation and evidence and strategy.
So yeah, I'm going to build on that. I think personally, my main objective is to be in the places where I can create the most impact. And of course, this is a biased opinion, but coming from academia, I do think that the non-profit sector is the most impactful sector out there. It might give us the impression that we don't have agency many times, and many times we don't. We don't have power, what I was telling earlier with the Turkish government. You might have the feeling and you might know about yourself and your organization that you can save lives, and then somebody with power doesn't allow you to do it. This is all frustrating, working in the non-profit sector, but you have a lot of impact. This is the most impactful sector out there. The most vulnerable sector, but the most impactful sector. So this is one thing that I take from working in this sector. And the beauty of doing technology for good is that this impact is measurable. That I can go now in the analytics and see how many people are getting a house a roof over their head right now that need this roof over their head in Lebanon or in Ukraine or wherever we intervene. And when working with organizations like Centro 22, and I think I remember it right, it was 14,000 beneficiaries that we had in 2023. There is a beauty of seeing that coming with our intervention, we might be able to double or add the number of thousands of people there with the power of technology. So that is a beauty, and being able to measure it, it makes you feel good. And the other thing is that we learn a lot, because, and I think this works for all of us. We meet very different people in very different contexts. On one day we work with people with post-traumatic stress disorder. On another day we're trying to give shelters to others. So we're in a position that we can learn about different ways of helping, but we can also learn about how these phenomena are manifesting themselves on the ground. And this is a huge privilege.
Well, for me, I fell in love with the program when they offered to me, hey, this is a project, can you do it? Can you implement it? Let me read it. And I was reading and wow, I really could do like something new, something out of nothing probably, because I used to work on a private consultation place, and actually I was also working at the government in Tijuana, so I also make a lot of social change by working on the government. But I wasn't feel fulfilled by working there. There was a lot of drama, and I changed the drama, right? So now I'm more in the, it's beautiful to work in a nonprofit. I think I made the great decision, or the greatest decision, because the people that works in Centro 22 is beautiful. It's amazing. Like, everything is, as you say, smooth as butter, right? And I love it. Like, every time, well, when I go to shelter, or when I used to go, because now we have another coordinator of the moral clinic, so I feel that I graduated from that, and I just provide some information and insights of how to do this work and not the other. But yeah, it's amazing. Like, there is drama, because working with people is, in psychology or mental health, it is drama, and there is trauma, and there is devastation, and I'm sorry to be kind of negative, but there's nothing romantic of working there, because there's a lot of pain and emotional pain. So to be part of that emotional growing is very important. And yeah, like, I think we all at some point got super stressed, but we knew since the beginning that self-care was very important for each of us, and we had some activities on the organization. But yeah, like, I'm happy to be part of that organization. And yeah, I don't want to talk about like that much about how I feel, but yeah, many people consider that I saved their lives, and that's beyond like comprehension. I feel very proud of that, just to be part of certain activities that impacted their lives in that such way. So it's really amazing.
I'll say a couple of things. So one, growing up in a developing country, growing up in Pakistan, it's very, the needs, there's no shortage of causes, there's no shortage of need, right? So for instance, I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, and just at the end of the street, if you turned left, there were informal settlements, like slums, if you will. And in the scorching heat, every day, they were just exposed to the elements and all of that. So you grow up very aware of people struggling. I remember when I was 8 years old, there was a famine in the Tharparkar Desert, which is about 250 miles east of Karachi, which is a big city of 20 million where I grew up. And I remember going door to door raising funds, just of my own accord, wearing my school uniform for credibility. But I was just, had this kind of child's determination, but also empathy for those who are suffering, and that, I saw myself doing that again. Years later, when I was at Yahoo, there was a big earthquake that killed hundreds of thousands of people in Pakistan, and again, I was fundraising, but it seemed to me like there's got to be a more systemic way, rather than just, raising funds and trying to fix things every time there's a big disaster. And when ultimately I stumbled upon this organization called Code for America, which was trying to pair technologists with government. It was very, very new. And I hadn't necessarily been thinking about government at that point, but all I knew was that I wanted to apply my skills in user-centered design and in technology to actually making people's lives better, to actually, social impact and doing something that felt it was meaningful. And so spending a year, taking a 2/3 salary pay cut, doing a year-long public service fellowship program at Code for America, which they called the Peace Corps for Geeks. I was partnered with the city and county of Honolulu, and really tried to understand the needs of citizens, and we did some remarkable things. But I think what was amazing to me was just how far behind government is, and the public sector is, and public services are, and those who have the least depend the most on these public services. Right? And they just don't work. They're so broken. And in places like Pakistan, they're even more broken. Right? And so all of the things that we know as designers, like why should that only apply to e-commerce or Amazon shopping or whatever it is that we do? And I certainly do that. Part of the issue, which, Bogdan, I know you said it's the most impactful sector, the nonprofit sector, which I am a part of, and the most vulnerable, and I would agree with that. And I would say it's also very broken the way it's set up, because I've been a volunteer doing Code for Pakistan and Tech for Change for the last 11 years. Not everybody can, choose to make those sacrifices, working 2 jobs, and sort of make life work. And I don't understand, like, if we are the sector is the one that's doing the most impact, why do we always have to make a choice between filling our souls or filling our wallets, right? And so this is part of the kind of the issue that plagues this sector. But the other piece of the issue is, when you think about the impact that we can have, it's tremendous. The government, the bar of doing something good in government is just so low, in a sense. So, for example, I remember I was giving a talk, and one of my students, I also teach, but one of my students who came up, after this talk, she said, well, the stakes are so high, kind of like what Olivia was saying earlier, like you feel like, the stakes are really high in public services or in humanitarian aid or anything like that, because people's lives depend on this, right? And given that, she was like, well, I would feel afraid to make a mistake. And I was like, well, guess what? In government, they're not even doing anything. Like, they're not even trying to be human-centered, much less humanity-centered. They're not engaging with citizens to try to understand. So anything you do will actually be a step forward from what is currently happening. The example I gave of Floodlight, with the floods, it was civil society that responded, or that always responds first, because they don't want to rely on government response. But it's very uncoordinated. Also, I think similar to what Olivia had shared, which is sort of like, oh, my neighbor is going to such and such place, like, with 5 tents. Like, do you want to help? And what we did was so simple. It was just an overnight solution. And then other civil society organizations came on board and put in their data. And just from if these just 2 meaningful, well-meaning sort of organizations try to work together, the impact, you can actually save a lot of lives, right? So the impact that we can create is huge. And, to Bogdan's point, I think we all just deeply care about, what am I going to do with this one life that I have that will actually move the needle forward for society in positive and meaningful ways.
I just want to leave a few more minutes for questions from the audience as well. So I want to ask each of you, just in a couple of 3 or 4 words, what advice you would have for the award winners, for example, that are starting off with these projects. What advice would you give that you think, based on your experience, that you would want to give them? Just a nugget of advice.
I'd say believe in the process, believe in the power of design. Communities can bring a lot of value when engaged early on and when engaged recurringly during the process. Experimentation is absolutely essential. It's better to fail small than fail big. So yeah, just re-emphasizing the value of design in doing good.
I guess I would say pause and reflect and record. You're all very much motivated by doing, by making, by changing. But in order to learn, you need to take that time to pause, to think carefully about what you're seeing, about what you're learning, and to make sure to take the time to record that so that you can continue to learn.
Yeah, I would say, going back to the first question that you asked me, where do you fail? Usually fail when you anchor with only one other actor. And I would say the advice is to anchor with as many other actors as possible and as diverse as possible. And the biggest mistake is to just anchor with a big actor or with government. Because government is fickle, government usually insulates itself from risk, and its mandate starts and stops at the border or starts and stops with citizenship. But people's problems don't start and stop at the border or with citizenship. So better anchor with civil society. And if I can add something else, one word, public service. We usually speak about public service usually when we speak about government and people in government, but I think public service should be a test that we apply to ourselves. Is this what we do, public service? And I think it's a test that any designer can put towards themselves, even when they work in the profit sector.
Well, for me, I think I just want to mention that your work, it is very important, even though you will feel insecure about it. So be flexible to change, be mindful, create a learning environment. And that's the key, because as they mentioned, it's a process of learning and removing things to create better interventions, or just when you are doing your job, something will pop up in your mind that you can create something better out of it. And maybe if you're working by a grant, maybe you cannot do it on that, but it's like an idea of how to develop a proper intervention for the future and for the people. So that's my recommendation. I think it is very important to believe in your work and in your teams also.
I would say it's really important to empower others. So lasting change really depends on us passing on the torch to the next generation of leaders. And so any project that we do with any community, I would encourage us to have a lens of how can we provide that community, the members of that community with resources, or empower them, or maybe teach them something, or give them the access that they need, so that they can then become leaders themselves, and then they can carry that on forward. And in that way, you have a ripple effect, right? That way, the community then stands up on its own because they've got their own leaders, and so on and so forth. And so just really investing in other people when we're doing our projects, so that that change can last beyond the time that our project is done.
Excellent answers, all of them. We have a few more minutes for questions from the audience, so maybe Tanner, if you could run to the people that have the question.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll take you first. I'm going to put this microphone right on the podium here, and we'll have you come so we can all hear you. I also want to just give a call out to Tijuana, that we will also take questions from you, and I believe we have a mechanism set up that you can submit those to us And I've got it right here on my phone. So if you have them, we'll take it from you. About 15 minutes for this.
Hello everyone. First I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to each of you speakers for sharing such moving and engaging insights today. Your experiences and perspective have truly enriched my understanding of community-driven work and the impact it can have. I'm inspired by the stories that you shared and a dedication you're showing to the communities you collaborate. With that in mind, I would like to ask, given your experience, the context, and the communities that you collaborate with, what does it mean to scale up a community-driven project to you? And what was the biggest challenge you faced in scaling, and how did you overcome it? And you can be really short. You can answer that. And what one or more tips would you offer for others looking to scale similar projects? And thank you.
I can start. 3 years ago, we started scaling from local, from Romania to global. Now we're an organization, a global organization that works all throughout the world. And I think the biggest challenge was keeping the culture of the organization. Because what made us successful at Code for Romania when we started 9 years ago was the fact that we were a very agile team who was mission-driven. Not funders-driven, but mission-driven. And it was very important for us for this not to change. And of course there are needs all around the world, and we would want as much funding as possible to be able to intervene everywhere, but beware not to grow too fast, because you need people like you when you grow. And keeping the organizational culture, I think it's the core thing, and this needs to be done with, put enough time and have patience with it.
2 cents. And when we do human-centered design, led experimentation, and you've invested a lot of time in designing something and piloting something, I think that you tend to become too attached to the solution. And then, but you need to realize that in order to scale, there are many pathways possible. One could be influencing policy, the other could be, creating a social enterprise, or handing over the solution to, someone else who could probably scale it up beyond what you could do. And so it's important to kind of start identifying those partners and scaling pathways right on, and not be so attached to the solution that this is my baby and only I should kind of own it or have the intellectual property for it. So I think those could be one of the biggest barriers that you face organizationally when wanting to scale. But it's important to keep an open mind and keep sight of what's the end goal. It is to serve the community and create that impact. So the means are not as important as the end.
Yeah. Any more?
Hello, my name is Hofras. I'm a university professor in Tijuana, and we received many questions from Tijuana. We need to edit and select questions. So they say, main students, professors, and Centro 32, and site guide staff. So they say each project is fabulous and have different approaches, insights, and strategies. How can we help each other to improve? And they go beyond. What can us, students, do to help your missions and your causes? And here's another question from Tijuana. So aside from a well-structured and presented plan, is there any advice that you would give people seeking funding to continue a humanitarian design?
There were many questions. Now, greetings to all the people in CETIS University. Let me think quickly. Well, for us in the field that we work, we do not come up with solutions. So the migrating process, it's a never-ending process. When we see them as waves, there are different huge influxes of people coming up to Tijuana and to the United States. So it's not our work to put a solution to that. That's the job of the governments. So for us, we think that through our services, we can improve people's lives, people's conditions while they wait for their hearings in the US or to get asylum. But unfortunately, we know that just very few have asylum granted, despite 5 years or 6 years. So that policy apparently and objectively is not working. So it's just like giving time, and they have permits to live here. So we're worried about them because of what is going to happen in January. So we know that bad things is going to happen, but there are always places or space to work and to improve. So yeah, new ideas are needed, more people are needed, because the amount of people that we encounter in Tijuana requires more and more help.
All right, we are actually at time. I wanted to also, just according to October here, you got another question?
I think we have.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, thank you for...
Sorry, can I also answer to the Tijuana? I'm trying to answer two of the three questions. First of all, what can they do? I know that as a young person, it takes a lot of courage to build a career in the nonprofit sector. So what they can do is have that courage, because it's hard, it pays less, it's more vulnerable as a job, you can lose it faster. But have confidence and have faith in this path forward. We need as many young people as possible, and I think the biggest bet and the most promising bet that we ever made at Commit Global is employing a lot of young people and helping them build a career in the nonprofit sector from the beginning, not convert when they're 40 or something from the profit sector to the nonprofit, but start early, because that builds a lot of confidence, that builds a lot of knowledge. There was another question about funding. How do you get funding for doing this type of work? This is not easy. This is not easy, and I would say have patience. Many times it takes 2 years, 3 years, and a lot of resilience for the first important funder to come. Once you convince an important funder, others will come, because it's a transfer of trust there. So try to get your first big funder or first very respectable funder, even if it's not a big sum, and never compromise your vision. Adapt your vision, adapt the vision based on the reality on the ground, but don't compromise your vision on whatever the funders ask. So this is my advice.
Very good. Okay, next question.
Thank you. I really appreciate the support. So my question to the panelists is, there is this popular saying that good design is good business, and what the panelists are kind of advocating is this idea of non-profit, and that is what most of the panelists have talked about. But I'll begin my question with a persona. This is my first time actually flying to San Diego. The first time I came here, I was riding with a friend, and when I got to the airport, I used ride sharing to get to my hotel, and the person who was kind of helping me with the ride share, like the driver, he did a lot for me. He was like, oh, do you need to charge your phone? Do you need this? He told me a lot about San Diego. Then at the end, it was like, let me take your phone number, and when you are returning, you can call me directly, then I'll pick you up. Then I realized that, wait, can't I just go online and pick my driver? But I realized that he was trying to communicate a pain point, that he was doing all the work as the driver, and he said something that the pay does not really get to him, only half or less than half gets to him. And my question to the panel is, now we have a problem. We have the business people and we have the users. So with these three intersection, how is the business people not cashing in so much from the problem and the users, but they are actually implementing design thinking in the business model so that it's the community that they are serving are actually the people who are benefiting from the solution, not the company who are deploying the solution, taking all the profit or maximizing profit, while the users are not really getting the maximum experience or the driver making the maximum profit. So in summary, kind of curious how the panelists will address how to implement design thinking in business models so that the solution is not to maximize profit, but to actually benefit the people that we are designing for, rather than cashing in from them. I know it's a long thesis, but I'm kind of curious how the answer will benefit all of us in the room. Thank you.
Well, as an economist, I feel like I'm obligated to provide some answer to that question, although I would actually be interested in having Carol answer that question as well, having designed for good in the for-profit sector for quite a while. I don't think we can ever expect that all design is going to be motivated for social good, and that there's always going to be very useful design that comes from a profit motive. And maybe that design can then actually be adapted later. We can learn from that design and use that design for social good. So I completely take your point. The economist in me is thinking about answers around things like regulation and competition, and that's not what you want to hear about today. So I think where I'll leave it is that we can't expect all design to be primarily motivated by social good. Let's use what we learn from design for profit motive and make sure that we can adapt those good designs for social good when possible.
Add some thoughts. One is, I would like to add some thoughts, and now that you can hear me. So Don and I actually started this initiative called basically it's the future of design education, and trying to basically open the aperture for right at design school. So you're not just learning to design an object, you're taking a broader perspective on climate and various other factors that are going to influence the success and the damage of that product. I've always believed that you don't just park your ethics and your responsibility for the globe at the door when you're doing your day job in a company. I think that can designers themselves do all of it themselves? Probably not. But I think we need to also step back as a broader community of like-minded thinkers like this, and to think about how could we make companies transition over to a world that has metrics. When we talked about metrics earlier, for example, the whole B Corp model is one that will get us there. Partly, I think there's also work going on the SEC and some other organizations where they're looking at climate impact, but unfortunately only on how it's going to impact their profit. But I think that we all collectively have a need to look at the big picture here. All of you are, in my view, solving a lot of the problems that are caused by companies, the for-profit motive solely, and also governments that aren't appropriately focused on sort of a broader perspective. So I've got this sense that we should all keep doing all the wonderful things you're doing, but we also need to have a movement, and I think Don is really starting that movement, that says, let's actually all get together, open the aperture even more, and say, what are the ways that we can change the world with design, because we've got this amazing superpower, to make even broader impact on the world as well. Bogdan?
Yeah, I think that builds on also what I was saying about being in public service, even if you're in business. And I would add something. I already spoke about what I call this positive Trojan horses that the designer can embed in the design. And I think a very good designer can do that. Can, hide those, embeddedness of equity and of fairness and of trust within tools that might be commercial. And of course, it can't be bulletproof, it can't be 100%, but it's a small gesture that can help. And I think the other side of the story is, speaking about the nonprofit sector, another name for it is civil society. So no, it's having a strong civil society that looks at that and looks at these behaviors and educates us about it.
And I just want to add one final thought, from me at least, and that is that I think that we need to, as designers and researchers, we have, as I said, the superpower to not only make money for companies, but to improve the world, and not just have it so that you have a for-profit sector and you have designers in that, and then you have the nonprofit doing the cleanup in the way that I would see it, but instead to also see that each designer and researcher has a moral and ethical responsibility to use this powerful skill that we have to, in addition to your day job, be also doing some of the kind of work that you're doing here. So when I retired, I actually started this organization called Habits for a Better World, basically taking 6 challenges, major, insanely challenging sort of areas of focus, and just asked for designers that are currently working, most of them are working wherever they're working, all over the world, to use some time every week to make a difference in the world. And we actually Srini, in the front here, myself, actually started this initiative after I did a keynote talk at the Design for America, where I made that case. I said all the designers here should be not just doing their work to earn a paycheck. They all had a moral responsibility to actually have impact on society. And shortly, like 4 months after that talk, the world experienced COVID-19. I said, okay, so we started the COVID-19 Design Challenge, brought in 250, 300 or whatever designers and researchers, and really made a difference in using design for that. So I think that all of you, whatever role you're in, whether you're in a nonprofit or not, I think we all have a moral responsibility to do what we can to improve the world, and then embrace Don's new model for broadening and opening the aperture as well. One final?
We'll take just one more question.
Okay, good. Here's another question. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello, this is might be a somewhat simple and personal question, but all of you represent such a huge pool of experience. But like everyone here, you've been faced with disappointments, actually major disappointments. And I'm curious as to the mechanism that you use inside of yourself and in your mind. Is it a picture of an experience you had with a child or a family or a positive experience? What do you use, what mechanism to help you move forward when you say to yourself, why am I doing this? And especially, Christian, you've been exposed to a lot of sadness, I'm sure, if you've been working in hard things. What do each of you use? Just a simple mechanism that you use.
Yeah. When we started the program, we were very few organizations. I think we were the only one that went to the shelters, and one shelter had a psychologist, and that's it. So I felt more worried about it at that time. If I don't come, something terrible is about to happen. But maybe it was something out of fear. But I will say this. So in my experience as a psychologist, at university, when we were starting practicing, a friend of mine had a patient and he decided to suicide. Not the patient of my friend. And I remember I said, if this happens to me, my career is ended before starting, right? So I was very mindful about it, and I did everything I could to keep the people alive. So that's my main goal. And I know that if I do at least one thing to give some hope, that's good enough. I don't care. We managed to create like a subjective way of measuring how they improve, and I just ask at the beginning of each session and at the end, from 1 to 100, how do you rate, how do you feel? And for many years in my prior experiences, 50 equals suicidal ideation. And migrants had 30, 20, 15, 10, and 5 at the first very session. So everything, at least one tiny intervention that could increase 10 points will be good enough for me. And that's what I did. And I can even tell you how much they increased by entering into the US. It gives them only 30 points. So it's not a big deal. But yeah, that's how we managed to work with those people.
Just to add on that, I think it also has to do with our expectations of ourselves and of the expectations of the world around us. And I think there's a lot of pain in the world, but the minimum expectation we can have is diminish this volume of pain, even with a small gesture. So if this is the expectation, I think we can all live with ourselves. And secondly, for me, it's having a team. It's having others that do the same. And in my previous life as an academic, I was a lone wolf because I was a social scientist. But in the non-profit sector, I work every day with people that sacrifice the same for the same goal. And that helps me, the fact that I'm not alone.
I think one very simple advice that I always stick by is progress over perfection. I think it's so easy to get bogged down by the scale of the problem that we are dealing with and just the need for solutions in the world. But I think it's important to remember your role as an individual contributor in this bigger picture, and then think about making smaller interventions and bringing change in lives of those who you can support, rather than just getting perturbed by the entire scale of the problem. So yeah.
Now, I would add to that to say, this is also a learning, right? So when I started as a sole founder, which I don't recommend to anybody, because then all your trials and tribulations are just yours alone, and if there are any little victories, those are also just yours alone. So it's pretty lonely and it's tough. But so many of us are motivated by wanting to have the most impact that we can have, and sometimes it can be really paralyzing, and it used to be earlier on for me in my career, paralyzing to think of, oh my God, like, what difference will this make in the grand scheme of the world, right? Like, it's like just doing a little tiny drop in the ocean. And then maybe it's age, or maybe it's just lots of learning. And I know that in my lifetime, like, government is not going to change dramatically, right? But what I know is that as long as I put in my best effort and I'm trying what to make the most of what my faculties are and what I can do, I can feel good about that and celebrate the little wins along the way. And I think that's really important, because if you forget to celebrate, because there's always going to be a mountain of stuff ahead, but you just have to celebrate those little things along the way.
All right, let's have one. Thank you to the panel. I think they're brilliant. They're doing great work in the world.
And thank you so much to you, Carl, for leading us through this and preparing these great questions. All right. Well, one of our goals for this conference was to get people to really open up and talk about what they've learned, right? Failures and not just successes. And I think we're beginning to achieve that. We have more to come, but we have lunch in between. So here's what we'll do. I believe lunch is served outside, just right here outside of the ballroom. You'll see it when you leave. We'll take about 45 minutes for lunch, and we'll reconvene in here at 1:30 for our second set of keynotes with a very different theme, and we'll introduce that when that comes. So thank you so much.